blank, underscore, blank. The snow fell in sheets that night, swirling under the yellow lamps outside the train depot. It was Christmas Eve in Chicago, 1952, and the city's veins of steel tracks ran like frozen arteries through neighborhoods where neon lights blinked. Jukeboxes sang half-hearted carols, and drunks stumbled home with their last paycheck in a crumpled coat pocket. At the little suburban outpost of Ravenswood Station, people gathered under the iron canopy to wait for the 8:45 inbound train from New York. There were families clutching parcels wrapped in red cellophane, servicemen just back from the war with their uniforms pressed sharp, and lonely faces looking for something warmer than the night air. Among them stood Eleanor Whitmore. She wasn't the kind of woman who drew attention. 62 years old, wrapped in a grey wool coat and scarf, she looked like any other widowed grandmother waiting to collect a loved one. But behind the rimless glasses and the patient smile lived a mind that never stopped turning. Eleanor was the type who noticed if a man wore the wrong hat for his shoes, if a woman's lipstick was smeared because she'd been crying, or if the ticket agent's hands shook a little too much when he tore a stub. People called her harmless, even Dottie. Eleanor preferred it that way. She had come to meet her nephew, returning from Columbia University for the holidays. But as she stood in the drafty station house sipping coffee from a paper cup, she felt something stir under the holiday chatter, a dissonant note, like a sour violin string cutting through a carol. That was when she saw him, a tall man in a dark military greatcoat, his hair silver at the temples, shoulders stiff as though still at attention. He paced the platform like a soldier without an army, glancing at the clock, then at the crowd. Colonel James Faraday, though Eleanor didn't know his name yet. His eyes carried a weight she recognized, a man who had seen more than he could tell. Then came Veronica Hale. She arrived in a flash of fur, fox collar brushing her chin, heels clicking against the icy boards. Veronica was the sort who made men straighten their ties and women curl their lips in envy. Her perfume trailed behind her like a promise no one could keep. She moved to the center of the platform, tapping her cigarette into the snow, scanning faces with impatience. Eleanor took another sip of her coffee, following the invisible threads between strangers. The train whistle blew, long and mournful, echoing off the warehouses beyond the tracks. Metal screeched, brakes hissed, and the 8:45 New York Central Limited groaned into the station, its cars glowing with warm light. The doors opened, spilling passengers onto the platform. That was when Richard Caldwell stepped down, mid-40s, pinstriped suit under a camel hair overcoat, briefcase polished to a shine. He moved with the brisk confidence of a man who knew his time cost money. His hat was tilted just so, his tie knotted with precision, but when his eyes locked with Colonel Faraday's across the platform, the confidence wavered. Something sharp and private passed between them, a look carved out of old grudges. Eleanor didn't miss it, nor did she miss Caldwell adjusting his scarf, loosening it as though he expected a handshake from someone he trusted. Moments later, the sound came, a muffled gasp, almost lost beneath the chatter and shuffle of departing passengers. Eleanor's head turned. People pressed forward toward the station doors. Laughter ringing, feet crunching in snow. Nobody else seemed to notice. But Eleanor felt the note of wrongness sharpen. It took less than 5 minutes for the scream to cut the night. A porter stumbled back from the gap between two train cars, shouting for help. Passengers clustered, gasping. Eleanor, moving faster than her years suggested, pressed through the bodies until she saw him, Richard Caldwell, sprawled across the ice-slick platform, eyes wide, face purpling, a wool scarf wound tight into the flesh of his neck. His briefcase lay yards away, abandoned like an afterthought, and just like that, Christmas Eve turned red in Ravenswood. Blank, underscore, blank. Detective Raymond Cray hated holiday calls. The homicide unit's office at the precinct had smelled of cheap tinsel and cold coffee when the dispatch came through. Now he stood in the freezing wind at Ravenswood Station, trench coat flapping, fedora pulled low, staring at the stiffening corpse of Richard Caldwell. The victim's hat had rolled away, filling with snow. Cause looks obvious, muttered the coroner, kneeling beside the body. Manual strangulation, scarf tightened after, no defensive wounds. Cray crouched, flicked his cigarette into the snow, and studied the scene. 100 people had swarmed this platform moments ago. Yet somehow, in all the commotion, nobody had seen a killer's hands on Caldwell's throat. That bothered him. He eyed the briefcase, too polished, too clean for a Chicago commuter. He signaled to Officer Dugan. Get that to evidence, dust it for prints, and find out if the guy bought a ticket here or in New York. Faraday was still there, arms crossed, jaw locked. Cray pegged him right away as military. Veronica Hale smoked nearby, telling anyone who'd listened that she had nothing to do with any of this. Eleanor Whitmore watched from the periphery, silent, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Blank, blank. The interviews started rough. Colonel Faraday admitted knowing Caldwell, casually, through community business. He said, but the tension in his shoulders said otherwise. Caldwell had been tied to the Community Restoration Fund, a pot of money meant to rebuild churches and schools after the war. Faraday had served on its advisory board. Rumor was Caldwell had been sniffing around, suspecting irregularities. Veronica Hale claimed she didn't know the dead man at all. But Eleanor, listening from a bench, remembered the way Caldwell's planner had slipped halfway out of his coat pocket when he stepped from the train. She'd seen a name scrawled on tomorrow's date, Hale, 11 a.m. The briefcase revealed even more. Inside were legal papers, financial ledgers, and a small glass vial coated with black dust. Detective Cray frowned at that one, muttering about chemical residue, but couldn't place it. The colonel bristled. That case isn't Caldwell's. He carried beaten leather, always did, hated shine, said polish was vanity. It was an oddly personal detail for a man who barely knew the victim. Cray made a note of it. Blank. By midnight, the station was nearly empty. Snow piled against the doors, muffling the city's roar. Cray was ready to wrap for the night. Call it an early-stage investigation with too many suspects and not enough facts. But Eleanor Whitmore lingered. She bent near the platform's edge, where Caldwell's body had been found, and touched the snow. Dark flecks clung to her glove, fine soot, gritty between her fingers. Not ash from cigarettes, not dirt from boots, coal dust. She looked toward the freight siding where engines dumped their loads. Coal dust belonged there, not here by the passenger cars. Her eyes lifted toward Veronica Hale. The woman's fox fur glistened, and along the hem, Eleanor noticed faint black smears. Veronica caught her staring and quickly brushed the coat. Too quickly. Eleanor said nothing, not yet. She only thought, the truth hides in what others sweep away. Blank. Detective Raymond Cray didn't trust old ladies. Not because they were dangerous, but because they noticed too damn much. Half his beat was chasing punks who thought they were clever and half was brushing off neighborhood gossips who thought they were Sherlock Holmes in a house dress. Eleanor Whitmore looked like the latter, except Cray had already caught her crouching by the platform, sifting coal dust like a chemist. You got something to say, Mom? He asked, flicking his lighter under a fresh cigarette. Eleanor straightened, brushed the snow from her gloves. Only that your crime scene is colder than the body. You'll lose what little it's trying to tell you if you don't look carefully. Cray squinted. And you're an expert in what? Exactly, she gave a thin smile. In people, detective. 40 years teaching history. You'd be surprised how much murder hides in the margins. Cray snorted, but something in her tone stuck. Blank. By morning, the Tribune screamed it across the front page. Lawyer slain at Christmas Eve train stop. A picture of Caldwell's stiff face sat above the fold, his scarf still knotted at the throat. The press hounded the precinct, demanding answers. Cray's captain wanted a suspect in irons before the holiday weekend was over. So Cray went with the obvious. Colonel Faraday had vanished. His boarding house said he checked out at dawn, paid cash, left no forwarding address. To the captain, that was good enough. The vet snapped. He said, slamming a fist on the desk. Maybe the lawyer caught him skimming that fund. We got motive. We got flight. Run with it. Cray wasn't convinced. He'd seen guilty men run. Yes, but he'd also seen innocent ones who knew the system would eat them alive do the same. Still, orders were orders. Eleanor Whitmore spent Christmas morning alone in her small brick house off Montrose Avenue. The tree glittered faintly in the corner. Presents waiting for the nephew who never arrived. Snow had stranded his train in Indiana. She read the Tribune slowly, lips pressed thin. The story didn't fit. If Faraday killed Caldwell to protect himself, why leave so many sloppy threads? Why let Caldwell's briefcase dangle in the open, stuffed with ledgers? Why strangle the man in the middle of a crowded platform instead of somewhere private? It smacked of staging, of theater. Eleanor bundled herself back into her coat. She had questions, and Ravenswood Station still held answers. Blank, underscore, blank. The snow had eased when she arrived, but the station was nearly deserted. Christmas Day left only a skeleton crew, one board porter, a telegraph operator smoking at his desk, and a janitor sweeping grit from the tiled floor. Eleanor approached the porter, a young man with freckles across his nose. His name tag read Tom Barker. "You were here last night?" she asked. He nodded nervously. "Never seen anything like it. Thought the fella was just drunk at first. Till I saw his eyes." "You checked the tickets yourself?" "Yes, ma'am, every stub." "But," he frowned, "there was something odd. A stub from yesterday morning's train got mixed into the pile. Shouldn't have been there. Different serial run." Eleanor's heart quickened. A passenger riding under the wrong ticket? Tom shrugged. "Could be. I told the detective, but he just grunted. Of course he had." Blank, underscore, blank. Detective Cray, meanwhile, was neck deep in paperwork. Caldwell's widow had been notified. She lived in Hyde Park, maintained a fashionable townhouse, and wept with the dignity of a woman who'd rehearsed grief long before tragedy struck. She swore Caldwell had enemies. Every lawyer does. She sniffed. But Richard was loyal. He believed in his causes. Cray pressed about the Community Restoration Fund. The widow pursed her lips. Yes, Richard had concerns. He'd planned to meet someone after Christmas with documents to prove money was missing. But she didn't know who. That was when Cray got the call. Veronica Hale had vanished. Her landlady reported the fur-clad socialite hadn't returned to her apartment after the murder. This morning, her scarf turned up near the frozen bank of the Chicago River. A splash of red wool against the ice. The captain nearly cheered. "It's perfect," he barked. Faraday killed them both. The lawyer first, then the dame who could tie him to it. Classic cover-up. We've got ourselves a Christmas madman. But Cray stared at the photograph of the scarf, unease gnawing his gut. The riverbank was miles from the station, and Veronica Hale was many things. Vain, careless, dramatic, but she wasn't stupid enough to wander into the slush alone on Christmas night. It smelled wrong. Blank, underscore, blank. Eleanor saw the picture too. In the evening paper, she set it beside the glove she'd kept from last night, the one she'd dusted against Caldwell's scarf while everyone else gawked. The fibers told their story if you listened close. The coal dust still troubled her most. Why on Veronica's fur, and nowhere near the river where the scarf was found? Coal dust clung to freight yards, to switch tracks, to the loading docks behind Ravenswood Station. It did not cling to frozen riverbanks. Someone wanted Veronica framed, which meant Veronica might still be alive. Blank, underscore, blank. 2 days after Christmas, Cray found Eleanor waiting outside his precinct. She sat knitting on the steps, needles flashing in the grey light. "You're persistent," he growled. "Truth tends to wander if you don't chase it," she said calmly. He sighed. "You think Faraday didn't do it?" "I think," Eleanor said, tucking her yarn away, "that you're hunting the wrong fox. Caldwell was killed by someone he trusted." He took off his gloves. "Detective, that means he expected a handshake, not a garrote." Cray froze. He hadn't told anyone about the missing gloves. Eleanor continued. "You're drowning in ledgers and witnesses and lost scarves. But sometimes it's the absence that matters. The ticket stub, the missing gloves, the handwriting that doesn't match." Cray narrowed his eyes. "Handwriting?" Eleanor nodded. "The ledgers in Caldwell's case. You saw them, neat columns, firm strokes, until the last few pages, which looked rushed, clumsy, not his hand. Someone planted them." Cray rubbed his jaw. Damn it, she was right. He remembered the scrawl. He dismissed it as fatigue. "Who, then?" he asked. "That," Eleanor said, "is what you and I must find out before another scarf turns up in the snow." Blank, underscore, blank. That night, the city howled with wind. Cray and Eleanor returned to Ravenswood Station together, lanterns cutting through the dark. The freight yard lay silent, black heaps of coal rising like burial mounds. Eleanor knelt near the loading docks. Her lantern beam caught threads snagged on a nail, scarlet wool, torn roughly. "Veronica's scarf," Cray muttered. Eleanor nodded. "Not lost by the river. Torn here. Someone moved it later." "Jesus." Cray exhaled smoke. "She's alive. Or she was. When they dragged her through, they searched the abandoned warehouse by the tracks. Dust and soot coated the floor. Crates towered like tombstones. And in the far corner, under a sheet of canvas, They found it, a woman. Bound but breathing shallow, eyes wide with terror. Veronica Hale, blank, underscore, blank. She coughed when they cut the gag away. Voice hoarse. It wasn't me, I swear, I never touched him. Who did this to you? Cray demanded. Her eyes darted. Fearful, she said I had to disappear. That I was in the way. Who? Eleanor pressed. Veronica trembled. Margaret Harland. The name dropped into the room like a stone. Eleanor's face hardened. Margaret Harland, wealthy, respected, sister-in-law to Veronica, and a board member of the very same community restoration fund Caldwell had been investigating. The pieces began to fit, snapping like rails on a frozen track. Blank, underscore, blank. Veronica Hale shivered as Detective Cray draped his coat around her shoulders. Her face was pale, mascara streaked into rivers down her cheeks. She looked less like the glittering socialite who had strutted across the Ravenswood platform on Christmas Eve and more like a frightened girl cornered in an alley. You're safe now, Cray said, though he wasn't sure it was true. Tell us everything. Veronica's lips trembled. I went to meet Richard. He'd written me, asked me to consult on some property transfers. I thought it was harmless. Then Margaret found out. She said I was jeopardizing her work. She came to me last night, furious, and then she trailed off, hugging Cray's coat tighter, and then, Eleanor Whitmore prompted softly. Veronica's eyes darted toward the shadows of the warehouse. She put something to my face. A cloth. I woke up here, bound. She said I'd ruined everything. That people would believe I killed Richard out of spite. She left me to freeze. Cray exchanged a grim glance with Eleanor. Margaret Harland wasn't just protecting herself, she was building a narrative. Piece by piece, to destroy anyone who stood between her and exposure. Why Caldwell? Cray asked. Veronica shook her head. He discovered funds missing. Margaret managed the books for the Community Restoration Fund. He was ready to reveal her at the New Year's meeting. That's why she silenced him. Eleanor folded her hands. And she nearly succeeded in silencing you as well. Blank, underscore, blank. Cray drove Veronica to the precinct under the cover of night, swearing the few officers on duty to secrecy. The captain wouldn't like it. But the captain wasn't here. Keep her out of the papers. Cray ordered. If Harland thinks she's dead, we've got an advantage. He left Veronica in protective custody and lit another cigarette in the corridor. Smoke curling under the buzzing fluorescence. Eleanor waited beside him, her knitting needles clicking softly. You believe her? Cray asked. Every word, Eleanor said. Fear doesn't lie the way vanity does. Cray smirked. You've got a saying for everything. Because people are predictable, she replied. Even killers. Especially killers. Blank, underscore, blank. The next morning, December 27th th, Cray paid a visit to the Harland estate on the North Shore. Snow blanketed the long drive, crunching under the tires of his squad car. The house was a mansion of brick and stone, windows glowing with warm holiday light. Margaret Harland greeted him herself, wrapped in a velvet robe, her dark hair pinned immaculately. She was Veronica's elder by 10 years, with sharper bones, colder eyes. Detective, she said smoothly. What an honor. I assume you've come to resolve this dreadful business. That's right, Cray said, stepping inside. Mind if we talk? Of course not. Coffee? They sat in the drawing room. All mahogany and oil paintings. Margaret poured coffee with a hostess's grace. Richard's death is a tragedy, she said, voice dripping sympathy. But surely Colonel Faraday is to blame. Everyone knows he quarreled with Richard over the fund. James was unstable. War changes men. Cray leaned back. Funny thing about Faraday, men like him don't keep clean boots and spotless uniforms if they're slipping envelopes from church funds. He ran a tight ship. Margaret's smile froze. Appearances deceive. Detective. Yeah, Cray said, lighting up. They do. He let the silence stretch, watching her face. Not a flicker. Not yet. Blank, underscore, blank. Meanwhile, Eleanor spent the day retracing Caldwell's steps. She visited his office downtown, a polished suite with frosted glass doors. His secretary, a nervous young man named Howard, confirmed Caldwell had been working on a case involving the fund. He said it was delicate. Howard whispered that people would be ruined if he exposed it, but he felt he had no choice. Did he leave anything here? Eleanor asked. Howard hesitated, then opened a locked drawer. Inside lay a single envelope addressed to Eleanor Whitmore. Her breath caught. She broke the seal. Inside were photocopies of ledger pages, 2 sets. The originals, neat and precise, and the forgeries, rushed and clumsy. Caldwell had seen the tampering. He must have prepared this for her because he knew she would notice what others dismissed. Eleanor closed the envelope with trembling fingers. She wasn't a detective. She wasn't anyone, yet Richard Caldwell had trusted her. Blank, underscore, blank. That evening, Cray returned to the station. Eleanor met him outside, the envelope clutched to her chest. "He left these for me," she said. Cray flipped through the papers, whistling low. "This is it. Proof Margaret cooked the books. Proof for us," Eleanor corrected, "but not for court. She'll say Caldwell fabricated them himself. We need more." "Like what? A confession? Or a mistake?" Cray frowned. "She's too careful." Eleanor's eyes glinted. "Everyone slips. The trick is giving him the stage to do it." Blank, underscore, blank. The stage arrived sooner than expected. On December 28th, Margaret Harland called a press conference at the Civic Hall. Cameras flashed. Reporters jostled. Typewriters clattered. Margaret stood at the podium in pearls and fur, declaring her grief over Caldwell's death and her dedication to continuing his noble work. She unveiled new ledgers, supposedly Caldwell's last entries, exonerating the fund. Cray muttered a curse under his breath from the back of the hall. She was laundering her guilt in front of the whole city. And it was working. The crowd applauded, but Eleanor's eyes narrowed. She leaned toward Cray. "Notice the ink. Fresh. Too fresh." "You're kidding." "Not at all. She wrote those last night." Cray hissed. "So what? We snatch the book and run tests." Eleanor shook her head. "Too clumsy. Better to let her bury herself." As Margaret fielded questions, Eleanor stepped forward, her voice carrying clear across the hall. "Mrs. Harland," she called, "perhaps you can tell us why Richard Caldwell carried a briefcase polished to a shine the night he died." The room stilled. Margaret blinked, caught off guard. "Why? Because it was his." Eleanor's smile was thin. "That's odd." Caldwell loathed polish, said it was vanity. Only someone who didn't know him, or knew him too well, would mistake that case for his. Gasps rippled. Cameras snapped. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. She recovered quickly, but Eleanor saw the flicker, the first crack. Blank, underscore, blank. That night, Cray and Eleanor sat in his car outside the Harland estate. Snow drifted against the windshield. Inside, lights glowed as Margaret paced her study. "She's rattled," Cray said. "Might make a move. Then we watch." Eleanor replied. Hours crawled by. Then, near midnight, Margaret emerged carrying a heavy box. She loaded it into her car and drove off toward the freight district. Cray started the engine. Showtime. They tailed her through the sleeping city, past shuttered diners and snow-choked alleys, until she pulled into a warehouse near the river. Margaret struggled with the box, hauling it inside. Cray and Eleanor crept after her, boots crunching softly. From the shadows, they watched as she pried the box open. Inside lay account books, checks, receipts, the true ledgers of the fund. She struck a match, preparing to burn them all. Cray stepped forward, gun drawn. "Drop it, Mrs. Harland," she whirled, eyes blazing. "You don't understand. If these come out, everything collapses. My husband's name, our family, the church, ruined. Better ruined than buried with bodies." Cray growled, but Eleanor noticed something Margaret hadn't. In her fury, she'd knocked over a smaller tin, the same tin Caldwell had hidden. Coal dust spilled across the floor. Eleanor's voice cut through. "Coal dust, Mrs. Harland, from the station yard. The same dust on Veronica's fur. You carried it with you the night you killed Richard." Margaret froze. And then, slowly, the mask slipped. "You old witch," she spat. "You see everything." Eleanor's gaze was steady. "Enough to know you staged the river. Enough to know you framed an innocent man. Enough to know Caldwell trusted you, just before you killed him." Margaret's shoulders sagged. The match dropped from her fingers. Cray snapped the cuffs on her wrists. "Margaret Harland, you're under arrest for the murder of Richard Caldwell and the attempted murder of Veronica Hale. Blank, underscore, blank." The ride back was silent. Margaret stared out the window, eyes dead. Cray drove with jaw clenched, every muscle taut. Eleanor sat in the back, knitting needles still in her pocket. She thought of Caldwell's trust, of Veronica's fear, of Faraday's exile. She thought of Christmas lights twinkling in windows as the city slept. And she thought of the scarf, the coal dust, the tiny details others had missed. The truth is never loud, she mused. It whispers, waiting for someone to listen. Blank, underscore, blank. Detective Cray leaned against the precinct wall, arms crossed, cigarette burning between his fingers. The clock above the booking desk ticked toward dawn. Margaret Harland sat behind bars, lips pressed into a razor-thin line, refusing to say another word. Hell of a Christmas, Cray muttered. Eleanor Whitmore settled on a wooden bench with her knitting bag, gave a quiet nod, and the new year promises no less. But Eleanor's mind was not at rest. Something gnawed at her, an itch at the back of her thoughts. Margaret Harland had confessed with her silence, surrendered with her fury, yet a seed of doubt rooted deeper. Richard Caldwell was clever, too clever to walk blindly into Margaret's trap. Why had he met her alone at the station? Why had he carried that briefcase, freshly polished? If he loathed vanity, why had he chosen that night? Something doesn't fit, she told herself. Blank, underscore, blank. By morning, newspapers screamed the headline, "Socialite widow arrested for holiday murder." Public relief was palpable. Margaret Harland, wealthy benefactor turned villainous, made an easy scapegoat. The city sighed with satisfaction. Certain justice had been done. Cray basked in none of it. He sat at his desk, staring at the evidence board. Caldwell's photograph stared back at him, bespectacled, precise. The scarf, the dust, the ledgers, each pinned like butterflies. Eleanor appeared at his shoulder. Your face tells me you're unconvinced. Cray rubbed his temple. I should be. We've got motive, opportunity, evidence. But something smells off. If Caldwell suspected her, why not go public sooner? Why not hand the ledgers to the board directly? Because, Eleanor said slowly, he trusted someone else first. Cray looked at her. You mean you? Eleanor's hands tightened on her knitting bag. He left me copies. But what if he left the originals with another? Cray sat up straighter. Who? Howard? His secretary, perhaps. Or Colonel Faraday, though that seems unlikely. Or, Cray said grimly, someone still out there. Blank, underscore, blank. That afternoon, Veronica Hale demanded an audience. She was restless under protective custody, pacing like a caged cat, demanding answers. You've arrested Margaret. Good, but don't you see, it doesn't end with her. Cray raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Veronica leaned forward, eyes sharp now, no longer clouded by fear. Richard told me he feared two people, not just Margaret. He said, if anything happens to me, look to the books, but also to the shadows behind them. The shadows? Eleanor repeated. Veronica nodded. He meant someone using Margaret. She thought she was clever, but she was being used. Richard saw it. Cray cursed under his breath. So we've just hauled in the pawn while the player's still moving pieces. Blank, underscore, blank. That night, Cray returned to the evidence lockup. He studied Caldwell's briefcase again, its surface gleaming. Something about the shine bothered him. He opened it, rifled through papers, but nothing screamed revelation. Then Eleanor, watching quietly, tapped the lining. Here, Cray peeled it back. Hidden between leather and cloth lay a single envelope, sealed with wax. He tore it open. Inside, a single page, written in Caldwell's precise script. If you are reading this, I have been silenced. Do not trust the first answer, nor the obvious enemy. The hand that kills may not be the hand that commands. Follow the money, follow the steel. Steel, Eleanor whispered, not coal. Steel. Cray's stomach sank. Christ, he wasn't pointing at Margaret at all. He was pointing at the stockyards, at the rail contracts, at the union deals, and at whoever profits from them. Eleanor finished. Blank, underscore, blank. December 29th th. Snow fell heavy over Chicago, muffling the city in white silence. Cray and Eleanor drove to the south side, to the factories and yards where iron and sweat built fortunes. There they found mention of Victor Dane, industrialist, owner of shipping lines and freight depots. A man who never appeared in the papers but whose money greased every wheel. Dane, Cray muttered. I've heard whispers. The kind of man you don't touch unless you've got a death wish. Caldwell dared to touch him. Eleanor said. They visited a warehouse registered to Dane. Inside, rows of crates marked with steel contracts, shipping manifests, ledgers of sums that dwarfed anything Margaret had handled. Money siphoned through the Community Restoration Fund. Yes, but ultimately funneled into Dane's empire. And there, buried in the files, was Caldwell's signature of protest. He had confronted Dane directly. Cray exhaled smoke into the cold air. So Margaret killed Caldwell to shut him up, but Dane orchestrated the whole show. She was protecting herself, but also protecting him, and now, Eleanor said, he will try to silence her before she talks. Blank, underscore, blank. Back at the precinct, Margaret sat in her cell. Icy calm. Cray stormed in, slamming papers on the bars. Dane used you, he snapped. You think you were saving your family name, but you were just his tool. You took the fall while he sat pretty. Margaret's eyes flickered for the first time. You're lying, she hissed. Victor wouldn't. Eleanor stepped forward. Wouldn't what? Sacrifice you? He already has. Caldwell warned us. He followed the steel. He knew Dane was the shadow behind you. Margaret's composure cracked. She gripped the bars until her knuckles whitened. If I speak, he'll kill me. Cray leaned close. If you don't, he still will. Silence. Then, slowly, Margaret whispered, there's a ledger. Not the church books. A separate one, hidden in Dane's private safe at the freight office. It ties him to everything. Cray straightened. Where's the safe? She gave an address. Her eyes were hollow. You'll never get close. His men guard it day and night. Blank, underscore, blank. December 30th. Cray and Eleanor prepared their move. This is suicide. The captain barked when Cray proposed raiding Dane's freight office. He's untouchable. Judges owe him favors. Politicians ride in his pocket. Cray slammed his fist on the desk. We've got probable cause. We've got witness testimony. What more do you need? What I need, the captain said coldly, is not to end up buried in a river. Drop it, Cray. But Cray had never been one to drop anything. That night, with Eleanor at his side, he drove toward Dane's empire. You realize, Eleanor said calmly, we may not return. Cray smirked. Hell, lady, I haven't been planning for retirement anyway. Blank, underscore, blank. The freight office loomed over the river, black against the snow. Guards patrolled with flashlights, their beams slicing through the dark. Cray slipped his revolver into his coat. Eleanor adjusted her scarf. Together they moved, shadows against shadows, slipping through a side entrance. Inside, the air reeked of oil and steel. Crates towered like tombstones. They crept toward an office door reinforced with iron bands. The safe's in there, Eleanor whispered, but before Cray could pick the lock, footsteps echoed. Two men in heavy coats rounded the corner, Tommy guns slung at their sides. Cray pressed Eleanor against the wall, heart pounding. The men passed, muttering about schedules, never noticing the intruders. When the hall was clear, Cray worked the lock. It clicked. They slipped inside. The safe loomed, a monster of steel. Numbers gleamed on the dial. Can you crack it? Eleanor asked. Cray grinned without humor. Lady, I grew up breaking into worse than this. Minutes stretched. Sweat trickled. Then, click. The door swung open. Inside lay stacks of ledgers. Envelopes stuffed with cash. Contracts signed in Dane's name. And at the very top, Caldwell's final notes. Annotated. Damning. Cray stuffed them into his coat. But then came the voice. I was wondering how long it would take you. Victor Dane stood in the doorway, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed despite the hour. A pistol gleamed in his hand. You've made a mistake, detective, Dane said smoothly. And you, Miss Whitmore, a pity. I admire sharp minds, but sharp minds cut deepest when buried 6 feet under. Cray aimed his revolver, but 2 guards stepped in behind Dane. Guns ready, outnumbered, outgunned. Eleanor's knitting needles pressed cold against her palm. She met Dane's eyes and saw what Caldwell must have seen, the true hand behind the curtain. The shadow in the steel. Blank, underscore, blank. The office smelled of gun oil and fresh ink. Victor Dane's voice filled the space. Calm as a choir leader but edged with iron. Put the papers back in the safe. Detective, Dane said, you've just signed your death warrants. Cray's revolver hung in the air. 2 of Dane's men had Tommy guns leveled at his chest. Behind him, Eleanor stood straight, her knitting bag clutched tight as if it were a shield. You kill a cop, Cray said evenly. The whole city comes down on you. Dane smiled, slow and cold. The city belongs to me. Judges, aldermen, ward bosses, they all eat from my hand. You'll be a footnote, a tragic holiday mishap, perhaps a drunken fall into the river. Perhaps 2. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. The truth has a way of surviving men like you. Mr. Dane. Dane's pistol twitched in her direction. Old woman, truth is what money says it is. The tension snapped like a wire. Cray lunged sideways, firing once. The shot grazed Dane's sleeve. The room exploded, Tommy guns barked. Wood splintered, glass shattered. Eleanor dropped low, pulling Cray down with surprising strength for her frame. Bullets stitched the walls. Cray returned fire, dropping one guard. The second swung his barrel toward Eleanor. She whipped her knitting needles forward, catching the man's wrist just long enough for Cray's bullet to finish the job. Smoke choked the air. Dane was gone. Damn it, Cray growled, coughing. He bolted. Eleanor rose, composed despite the chaos. With men like him, retreat is never defeat, it's strategy. He'll regroup. Cray stuffed the ledgers deeper into his coat. Then we bring him down before he plays his next hand. Blank, underscore, blank. They fled into the night. Snow soaking their shoes. Sirens wailing in the distance. By dawn, the papers screamed again. Double shooting at freight office. Unknown assailants, escape with records. But Cray knew the truth. Dane had covered his tracks. By morning, the freight office was scrubbed. The bodies gone, witnesses silent. Back at the precinct, Captain Doyle slammed his fist on the desk. You've crossed the line, Cray, breaking into a private office. Gunfire, you want me to bury you? Cray threw the ledgers on the table. Bury these instead. They've got signatures, dates, bribes, shipping fraud, all tied to Dane. Doyle leafed through the pages, sweat beading at his temple. He closed the folder with shaking hands. This never leaves this room. You hear me? Never. Cray's jaw clenched. He's bought you too. Doyle's silence was answer enough. Eleanor's voice cut in, crisp as breaking glass. Detective, we can no longer rely on official channels. If the tree is rotten at the root, one must plant seeds elsewhere. Cray stared at her, then at the ledgers. You're saying go public? Yes, Eleanor said. The press, the people. Dane thrives in shadow. Drag him into the light. Blank, underscore, blank. December 31st. Chicago braced for the new year. Fireworks stockpiled, champagne chilled, but in smoke-filled newsrooms downtown. Typewriters clattered as Cray fed documents to hungry reporters he still trusted. Eleanor sat nearby, watching headlines birth themselves. Steel tycoon tied to church fund fraud. Dane empire built on blood money. The presses thundered, ink staining thousands of sheets. By nightfall, Dane's name was splashed across every street corner. But power does not topple quietly. That evening, Veronica Hale was abducted from protective custody. A note was left behind. Elegant script, return what is mine, or the woman dies before midnight. Cray's stomach turned. Son of a, he's escalating. Eleanor read the note twice. Lips pursed. Not just escalating, finalizing. Midnight is not merely New Year's, it is spectacle. He intends to make a lesson of her. Cray slammed the table. Then we find her before he does. Blank, underscore, blank. Snow fell heavier as the city counted down the last hours of the year. Cray and Eleanor scoured leads, dockside informants, union bars, freight schedules. Finally, a whisper led him to the abandoned LaSalle Street terminal. A cavernous skeleton of steel beams and shattered glass. It would be poetic, Eleanor said grimly as they approached. To end the year where so much began, at a station. Inside, echoes carried like ghosts. Cray's flashlight sliced through dust and frost. Then, bound to a chair beneath the cracked departure board, Veronica Hale lifted her head. Gagged, terrified, Cray rushed forward, only for a voice to boom from the shadows. Drop the gun, detective. Victor Dane stepped out, flanked by two more guards. His pistol gleamed, steady as iron. You've embarrassed me, Dane said, tone icy calm. You've plastered my name across the city. That, I cannot forgive. Tonight, I reclaim control. The lady dies. You vanish. And the year begins anew, my year. Cray's finger twitched on the trigger. You've lost, Dane. The papers are out. Your empire's crumbling. Dane smirked. Empires don't crumble overnight. They adapt. They crush opposition. Starting now. He raised his pistol toward Veronica. But Eleanor stepped forward, voice sharp as a bell. Victor Dane, do you know why Richard Caldwell polished that briefcase? It wasn't vanity. It was a mirror. He wanted someone, anyone, to notice who stood behind him at the station. And I did. I saw you reflected in it. Dane froze. His eyes flickered. Just for a second. That's impossible, he hissed. Eleanor's chin lifted. Impossible is only the word the guilty use when truth exposes them. The briefcase survived. Dane, your reflection is there still. waiting for a jury to see it. Cray seized the moment. He fired. One guard fell, screaming. The other fled into the dark. Dane spun, shot cracking. Cray ducked behind a column, firing back. Bullets ricocheted. Veronica struggled against her bonds. Eleanor ducked low, knitting bag clutched to her chest. Eyes locked on Dane. The city above roared with fireworks as midnight neared. The showdown for Chicago's soul thundered in the hollow station below. Blank, blank. The shattered LaSalle terminal breathed like a grave. Every sound amplified in the cavern of rusted beams and frozen glass. Fireworks cracked faintly in the distance, Chicago's countdown to midnight. Inside, gunfire echoed like its own grim celebration. Cray crouched behind a steel column, revolver hot in his hand. Across the hall, Victor Dane moved like a predator, pistol steady, the pale light catching the angles of his face. Veronica Hale thrashed against her chair, muffled cries cutting the air. And Eleanor Whitmore, composed even in chaos, held her knitting bag close, eyes never leaving Dane. Put it down, Cray. Dane's voice rang. You can't stop this. I built half this city's veins. My steel runs through its bridges, its rails. You pull that trigger, the city bleeds with me. Cray spat into the dust. Then let it bleed. Better than rotting under your boot. Another shot barked, stone chips raining from the column. Cray ducked lower, heart hammering. His revolver only had 2 bullets left. Dane could spray as long as he liked. Eleanor whispered sharply, her voice carrying across the echoing hall. Victor Dane, I know why you killed Richard Caldwell. It wasn't simply the ledgers. It was fear. He saw through you. He realized you were never steel. You were rust, spreading rot through every joint of this city. Dane's jaw tightened. His pistol swung toward her. One more word, old woman, and you won't see midnight. Then make sure, Eleanor replied coolly, that your aim is better than your morals. The fireworks above boomed louder. 11:58. Cray broke cover, firing. Dane stumbled back, grazed across the shoulder. He roared, answering with 2 shots, one sparking off iron inches from Cray's skull. Eleanor darted forward, not away, but toward Veronica. She slashed at the ropes with scissors from her knitting kit. Dane saw. He pivoted. Cray hurled himself sideways, slamming into the industrialist just as the pistol fired. The bullet screamed past Eleanor's ear, shattering glass. She didn't flinch, slicing the final rope free. Veronica gasped as her gag dropped. Run, Eleanor ordered, but Veronica stayed, trembling yet fierce. No, I won't let him win. Dane and Cray wrestled, fists crashing, boots scraping on frost-slick concrete. Dane was stronger, thicker, fueled by rage. He slammed Cray's head against the column, stars bursting in the detective's vision. Chicago belongs to me, Dane bellowed. Always has. Eleanor's voice cut in, sharp as a knife. Not tonight. She swung her knitting bag. Inside was no yarn, but the weight of Caldwell's stolen ledgers. The bag cracked against Dane's skull. He staggered, long enough for Cray to wrench the pistol free. The revolver rose, steady now, black muzzle fixed on Dane's chest. Dane sneered, you don't have the guts. Cray, you're a cop. You need laws. Trials. Papers. Me, I am the law here. Cray's finger tightened. His breath came ragged. You're wrong, Dane. You're just another crook with a fat wallet. And tonight the city cashes you out. The shot rang like a thunderclap. Dane collapsed, sprawling on the frozen concrete, eyes wide with disbelief. The fireworks above burst in cascades of color, painting his lifeless face in red and gold. Midnight. Blank. Silence followed. Only the crackle of fireworks and the ragged breathing of survivors filled the vast station. Cray lowered his gun, shoulders slumping. Veronica clung to Eleanor, sobbing relief into the older woman's shawl. Eleanor touched her cheek gently. You're safe now. Caldwell's truth lives on because of you. Cray checked Dane's body. No pulse. The Empire of Steel had ended not with contracts, but with a single bullet. Blank. The days after were a blur of ink and noise. The ledgers spilled into the press. Undeniable, unstoppable. Judges tried to silence the papers, but the public roared too loudly. Dane's empire unraveled overnight, freight contracts seized, politicians forced into daylight, aldermen resigning in disgrace. Margaret Harland, faced with the truth of her manipulation, pled guilty to fraud but was spared a murder charge. Her name was ruined, her wealth stripped, but she lived, perhaps her first honest punishment. Veronica Hale emerged from the shadows a different woman, quieter, hardened, no longer the pampered socialite but someone who had stared death in the face and survived. She spoke publicly about corruption, lending her voice to Caldwell's cause. As for Cray, the department branded him reckless, a liability. The captain never forgave him for embarrassing the brass. He was offered early retirement. He declined. Instead, he walked away on his own terms. Badge surrendered but head unbowed, and Eleanor Whitmore returned to her modest home, her knitting needles clicking once more by the fire. Neighbors saw only a quiet widow. Few guessed she had stood toe-to-toe with Chicago's most dangerous man and watched him fall. Blank. Weeks later, Cray visited her. The city outside thawed, ice breaking on the river, smoke curling from chimneys. "You ever regret it?" he asked, sipping the tea she'd offered. "Regret what?" she said mildly. "Looping yarn. Walking into hell with me." Eleanor smiled faintly. "My late husband once told me, evil thrives because good people wait for others to act. I am too old to wait." Cray chuckled, though his eyes stayed somber. "Without you, I'd be a corpse in that station. And without you," she counted, "the city would still kneel to Victor Dane." They sat in comfortable silence. Outside, children skated on the thawing ice, their laughter carrying on the wind. Cray rose, pulling on his coat. "Well, Mrs. Whitmore, if trouble stirs again, you'll know where to find me." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "And if it does, detective, I expect you'll know where to find me." Blank. That night, Eleanor sat alone by the fire, a single ledger open on her lap. Not Caldwell's, not Dane's, her own. In neat script she recorded names, dates, fragments of truth. For corruption was not ended, only delayed, but she would be watching, always, and in the city of steel and smoke, where shadows grew long, that watchful eye might one day mean the difference between life and death. The end.